Well, ladies and gentlemen, some really explosive news to cover today. I mean, it's like this every day at the moment, isn't it? But before we do, can yet again remind you, well, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. You know the drill, guys. Hit the bell icon. Just join the channel. Any case, before we get on to the really, really big stuff, let's get on to some minor stuff. And the first one is around the jobs data. Because if you hadn't noticed, the South Africa's official job employment rate, according to the latest statistics, have gone up to 33.2%. Now, this has gone up 0.3% from 32.9%. Now, in the expanded definition, well, this has gone to 42.9%. But this is actually down 0.2%. So why is there a drop and a growth in different sectors? Well, according to the job statistics in the formal sector, 34,000 people gained jobs. And so these were individuals who are now employed formally. The informal sector, however, lost 19,000 jobs. And so ultimately, the trade winners were the trade industry with 88,000 new jobs, private households with 28,000 new jobs, and construction with 20,000 new jobs. Now, the industry losers, the people that lost the most jobs, were community and social services at 42,000 jobs lost, agriculture with 24,000 jobs lost, finance, now that's a big one, at 24,000 jobs, and transport at 15,000 jobs lost. Utilities with 6,000 jobs lost, and manufacturing with 5,000 jobs lost. Oof, what some statistics. Now, looking at it by province, these, I must admit, were a surprise because 95,000 new jobs were created in Gauteng, 89,000 new jobs were created in the Eastern Cape, but the Western Cape lost 117,000 jobs. KZN lost 86,000 jobs, and the Northern Cape lost 28,000 jobs. And so you may look at that and say, well, why did this happen? And actually, the reasons for it are actually very easy to understand. In the first instance, well, Cape Town's actually now very, very overpriced. Property in the Western Cape is very expensive, which means that the wages have to reflect. Now, property in the Eastern Cape and Gauteng at the moment are very depressed, meaning that many individuals have moved to those areas to benefit from the low property prices. So that's basically why. In terms of youth unemployment, well, the youth unemployment, that's people between the ages of 15 and 34, unemployment rose up by a further 39,000 individuals to 4.9 million kids use unemployed. In terms of employed youth, well, that went up by 31,000 to 5.7 million, meaning that the youth jobless rate remained steady at 4.61%. And so you may look at it and say, well, how did it go up when it came through to unemployed, but then also went up in terms of employed? And that's because a number of individuals, kids, would have graduated into that new bracket, meaning that the figures would have gone up. But when you look at it on a whole, as a parity, it's still relatively steady. In any case, unemployment figures in the country not really showing any form of job creation, which we were reminded that the DA went into the GNU to save the economy and create jobs. Now, another issue has been highlighted by the Transport Minister, Barbara Creecy, and that is in terms of South Africa's aviation. And she specifically highlighted the talent drain as veteran pilots retire and the younger pilots all look to leave the country for better pay abroad. Now, South Africa is hosting a global summit to build a youth pipeline into aviation. But I've got to say, this entire headline fills me with dread because the aviation industry was one of the industries heavily hit by affirmative action and BEE. And the net result of that is that they haven't been able to train new pilots. And I, for one, I don't know about the rest of you, I am not looking forward to a BEE employee going and flying a plane for no other reason than they were there to fulfill a quota. I think planes, a bit like heart surgery, are a profession that should be 100% based on merit. That's not to say that individuals who are black, colored, Indian, whoever else cannot fly a plane. What I'm saying is that It worries me immensely that the government's talent pool, the number of people who can do the job, dries up, and all they do is they shove some taxi driver and they go, yeah, fly planes, the same thing. Because the reality is that's how our government generally tends to work. What can I say? This really, really concerns the hell out of me, and to be frank, it should concern the hell out of you. Now let's move quickly onto the UF trade tariffs, with the news out that South Africa has issued a revised offer to the United States. But what's actually happened? Well, South Africa has submitted a revised offer to Washington to reduce and suspend the 30% tariffs imposed after they missed the deadlines, because as we've discussed on this channel numerous times, the ministers are all useless. Now, according to the South African government, this new offer is what they consider to be generous. Now, the sweeteners, as they term it, are that they will allow the US to ship poultry and pork into South Africa. But the main issue that remains contentious is around BEE, the race-based policies, because as we know, this is a key graph for the US, and in terms of South Africa, well, they really won't budge on this, regardless of how the foreign world looks at the policy itself. Now, in the meantime, Cabinet says that they will keep talking to the US, but whilst they're doing that, they are going to continue to diversify exports. They're going to put in place support packages for vulnerable firms and workers, although we've seen how that worked during the COVID era with nobody actually really getting paid, and that they will protect trade against dumping and any form of demand-side measures. This is basically somebody saying, we don't want all your product anymore, now what? So maybe the government will buy it and, I don't know, sell it to Mozambique, who knows? Now, in terms of trade diversification, this comes on the back that John Steenhuisen has announced that South Africa aims to sign a new stone fruit export deal with China within the next month, targeting fruits like peaches, plums, nectarines, apricots, and prunes. Now, according to John Steenhuisen, this would pivot away from South Africa's over-dependence on the US market and would allow South Africa to ease the impact of the punitive US tariffs. Now, if the trade deal is signed, the first shipments potentially could be sent to China by the end of the year. So it's still a long time for farmers to be without any form of income, with no one to sell their goods to. So moving then on to one final story before we get on to the kickers. And this is the story that the Sports, Arts and Culture Minister, Gator McKenzie, says he refuses to apologize for alleged racist posts, and says he will only resign if Cyril Ramaphosa asks him to resign, but he continues to deny racism. According to Gator McKenzie, he says you cannot apologize for something he didn't do. You can let me know what you think of that in the comment section below. So now let's get on to the 3 hot topics of today. I know you've been waiting for them, and to be honest, they really are a doozy. And the first one is that the ANC has defaulted on an agreed quarterly payment to Ezulweni Investments under its December 2023 out-of-court settlements over the 115 million election materials debt. Now, you will recall that this election materials debt actually was due to bankrupt the ANC until it suddenly disappeared at the last moment. Well, the ANC agreed some quarterly payments and they've now renegated on it. They can't pay it. Now, according to the investments company, they sent a letter of demand to the ANC on the 31st of July to the Treasurer General, Gwen, warning of a writ of execution to attach ANC assets of payments weren't made. And I've got to say, guys, you should have just attached the Thuli house in the first place like you were going to. In any case, ANC lawyers are now disputing invoices and are inviting the investment company to meet with forensic auditors, with the investment company accusing the party of stalling and repeatedly cancelling meetings. So we are reminded that this is how the debt got to this amount in the first place. They kept saying, well, the debt isn't real, and then it went to court, and the court said it is. And they said, well, it isn't as much as it is, and it went to the court, and they said, yes, it is. And so the ANC frequently said, wow, we just don't believe you. And ultimately, that's how the debt ballooned. But ultimately, this does revive the question around the party's finances, specifically post the elections. And what it really does mean is that when it comes through to the municipal elections, many individuals are speculating that the ANC is frankly just not going to have the money to contest the elections. And what this does also mean is that it raises further court action and the potential to asset attach the Thuli house all over again. So what does this actually mean? Well, it could mean that basically the ANC goes cap in hand to Iran and asks for another, bailout or loan or whatever. It is alleged by some podcasters I've heard that apparently the ANC did the last time. And so with that in mind, it goes on to the second news story today. And I must admit, the minute I read the story, I thought this is just peak retardation. Peak retardation, which we constantly see in South Africa. And this is the news that one of our generals has gone to Iran on the 13th of August. They've just gone to Iran and they've toured Iran's Army Command and Staff University in Tehran, meeting multiple senior Iranian military officials. Now, according to the Iranians, the actual trip has a political message. So they consider this to be a political trip. And the Iranian generals pitched it as a military technical industrial cooperation meeting, which includes student and faculty exchanges, which would start in September. Now, it's very curious that whilst there, this general of South Africa talked about how the United States was terrible, look what it was doing to Iran, it was such a buddy, and it was doing the same in South Africa with tariffs. And so one would have to look at this from the optics perspective and say, you are definitively making an ally of Iran and no longer treading the supposed path of non-alignment. This should be easy for any person with half a brain cell to understand. And so one has to ask the question why they would do that whilst South Africa attempts to mend trade ties with the United States. Many analysts warn that Iranian engagement could complicate the tariff talks with Washington. And why is that the case? Well, the problem is that the US sees no difference between trade and politics. The two in the US mind is tied. And so the US does not feel a thing to penalize a country's trade in order to satisfy its politics. So this is stupid, because ultimately South Africa's trade with Iran is like 300 million. It's like nothing. We don't trade with Iran. Iran in itself is not a thriving country. So why we would make our bed with these guys, I really don't know. And the Islamist capture of South Africa is just continuing unabated. It is just retardation peak levels. Which actually brings us on to the final news story, and this is specifically because of the story we just covered, and that is that the Western nations, 14 governments, and that is Albania, Austria, Belgium, Canada, the Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Netherlands, Spain, Sweden, UK, and the US, have all written a letter to Iran condemning the growing number of Iranian intelligence operations in Europe and North America, specifically in relation to kidnappings, killings, and harassment, often with criminal networks being set up which target journalists, dissent, Jewish citizens, and current or former officials, such as the fatwa issued against Donald Trump. Now, according to these individuals, they have all pledged to work together to prevent such attacks and urged Iran to immediately cease these activities and hostilities to the West. Now, you've got to look at this and say, why exactly would South Africa align itself in terms of its geopolitics with Iran, given the security and diplomacy signaled to Iran from Western nations? Again, peak retardation. We're just seeing it in unbelievable volumes from these ANC morons. The retardation is just at peak levels. In any case, that's just my views. Do let me know what you think in the comments section below. Until next time, bye.